All right, hello, and welcome not into the Pine Room podcast. Doing something a little different this week, as everyone is busy doing their respective tasks in life. So it's just me here today talking to you from behind the microphone. You might not like this format, so if you don't, it doesn't bother me at all, but maybe you do. This is going to be something maybe I do every now and then, and I may even do it alongside the podcast, so we'll see as far as where this goes. It's on audio and video too, so if you're interested, you can go check this out on video. There's not much to look at other than myself and a stack of books and a candle behind me. So we're going to go into some things that I find interesting and go into a little bit of a deep dive in kind of a shorter format than the podcast normally is. Shooting for like 30-ish minutes maybe. So if you're interested in that and maybe it's a little bit towards your liking as far as time goes, then, certainly stick around and you can kind of get a peek into some of the things that I find interesting. I hope you enjoy. This is kind of a one-off thing that I'm doing for now, and if it's not any good, then we're certainly not going to do it again. But why do I think that fantasy is better necessarily? And when I say better, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, fiction, if you're unaware, for those that might not be the initiated into literature, fiction is obviously things that are made up. A fiction is stuff that is not based on factual truth. Now, there are some things in fiction that are based on science and based on things that have happened in our world, but for the most part, fictions are original works such as Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or the like, which Harry Potter is set in a modern day world, but obviously the wizarding world does certainly not exist. So we're going to go into that a little bit, and I'm going to explain why I think that those things are more significant than the truthful world and the biographical world that you can also pick from nonfiction. So to me, fantasy and sci-fi, for those of you who don't know what sci-fi is, science fiction, as it's called, is exactly what I just explained. It's fiction, but based more around science. So think of your Star Wars, your Star Trek, your traveling through space, time travel, such as the like. But to me, fantasy and sci-fi open up your mind towards different ideas and things that are normally boring, such as politics, morality, the human condition, identity of yourself. The way that fiction and fantasy and sci-fi is able to take those ideas that are normally boring and normally a bit mundane for somebody that might not have the greatest imagination to wrap their head around. They take those things and they kind of wrap it around in a world and in a symbolism that makes it a little more engaging for somebody that is just looking to take a dive into those areas. And just because those events didn't happen doesn't mean the emotion and the lessons and the story and the what can be gathered from the story isn't real. So that's kind of one of the things that I look at when I think about fiction. And number one, let's just start off with this too. I just think fiction is way more exciting. I'm a person that likes to pick up a book or pick up a show and get ingratiated in something that I know nothing about, something that's new, something that's fresh, something that it maybe has opened my brain into an area where I didn't think it was possible, or something that I can imagine about or fantasize about in the future, or when I sit down at night, I can think about, what would I be like in this world? Whereas a fiction book where I'm learning about the history of somebody or somebody's life, there's only a certain limit to the imaginative creativity that can be endowed upon someone in their life. Now, things can happen that are crazy. I know that the luckiest man in the world, according to stories, he fell out of a plane, he got hit by lightning, he won the lottery, things like that. I mean, those are interesting, but there's only a certain limit. You can only hit a certain ceiling as far as creativity and excitement and, I guess, just overall grandeur of a person's life. I mean, we have kings and queens and monarchs and dictators and things like that, but, in a world that's fantasy where there are no limits, you kind of get to push those boundaries into a different direction. And also within fiction, I think fiction also puts you inside of people wildly different from you. So even if they're an alien or some kind of wizard that casts spells or is from a different planet or a different realm or doesn't speak in the common tongue, you kind of open up your brain to scenarios and styles of life and practices and cultures that don't even exist, to then pull back once you're done reading and look at the different things that you see in everyday life and go, you know what? Maybe I didn't have an understanding about this or that, or maybe I didn't have the imagination or the compassion to understand this person's point of view or understand the challenges that a person has gone through or that a culture's gone through. And you can kind of relate that to not only yourself, but also people out in the world too. You think about Lord of the Rings, and I'm just going to use this example because it's a very common fantasy and people know, relatively, people know about Lord of the Rings. Frodo had to carry the ring all the way to Mordor and throw it in Mount Doom to destroy the ring. And during the way, he dealt through all kinds of different tragedies and struggles. And in the end, he made it through all those. And as Samwise Gamgee said, when the sun shines, it'll shine all the clearer. But my point is, you can take an adventure such as that and apply it to your own life. So if you're going through a struggle or you're going through something, you can kind of tailor a person's adventures in a story or a group's adventures in a story or the struggles or the challenges that someone faces in a story in a fantasy world. You kind of take that and tailor it towards what's happening in your own life in a more, maybe not understandable approach, but something that's a little more engaging than to what, just to be honest, a more depressing, realistic version of those struggles would be in a nonfiction or a biographical or autobiographical piece. But speaking on imagination and with how fiction and fantasy more rather builds that imagination, it also builds kind of innovation. In much of our modern technology was once science fiction. I mean, you think about video calls, FaceTime, phones, cameras, if anything, any kind of technology that has been invented, maybe not all, but a good bit has been at one point science fiction. Holograms now are a thing, and you see those in Star Wars. They are now a thing that are being implemented in the news. I mean, we see broadcasts of news televisors that are giving readings of how deep floodwaters are going as they're showing themselves in the floodwaters. I mean, 20 years ago, you would have never thought that anything like that would be possible, but it was being written about. And you get to look at now books that you read now and you go, boy, what are some of those things that could possibly be in the future? And it opens up your imagination to imagine a world where things that writers and sci-fi writers specifically imagined first before engineers caught up. So I think that's also another cool thing, to be able to imagine and process a world that could possibly be down the line. And for better, I mean, other than magic, which science could be related to magic in several terms, nothing is off limits. We've seen that in the world, and we'll get into a little bit more of that in the next little segment here. But yeah, I think that imagination builds innovation, it builds technology, and those writers who were once writing about things that they probably never believed would become a thing, engineers and people that know far more things than I do, are able to turn those into real things. But fantasy also, if we're looking at it in a grand scheme, it also gives you hope and agency. I mean, in a real world where problems often are more common than not. I mean, you look at news now and things are huge and, unstoppable tragedies going on across the world. But in fantasy, I mean, in any nonfiction, or any fiction rather, you get to watch people beat the impossible. Things that in this world are rather impossible. You get to see people conquer challenges that are much greater than what we would face here in the everyday world. Not that our challenges here in the world are any less devastating than in a fake world, But in fantasy, you get to see the way things are conquered, and it gives you a little bit of hope into whatever struggles that you might be dealing with in life or that might be happening in the world. And I will talk a little bit about a book that I just finished and how that kind of has given me a little bit of an insight into things that I've faced in my life. But it gives you hope, and it sticks with you when you're dealing with something. You can look back and you can say, such and such dealt with facing an adversary that had no reason. They had no reason to defeat, and somehow along the way, whether it be through some sort of change in character or an addition to their character or whatever, the boundless spider webs that fantasy can go down, they conquered a challenge. And I know that that's possible in nonfiction, that's possible in autobiography stuff and war stories and different technological challenges or educational challenges or home life challenges. But those things are lack of better terms, boring compared to some of the things that you could see in a fantasy novel or in a sci-fi or in a fiction. I keep getting the two terms mixed up. But nonetheless, I think that for people that often need a little more to encourage them or to stimulate a never give up attitude or hope or something like that, something that is a little more grand is more beneficial than, say, something that's more relatable even than what fiction can provide, if that makes sense. But fiction also, and this is one of my final points here, it helps us to escape, to come back stronger. At least that's the way I look at it. So people, especially in what I found, is that a book is really, any show really, and fiction in general, and I'm talking specifically about books, not specifically, but I'm referencing books here because that's what I've been, so deeply into. And this goes for anything too. TV, games, books, anything that can be fiction and can be written and expanded upon. You're escaping into a book, and I don't necessarily find that nonfiction allows you to escape because you're still in the world. You're still in a world that is real, and you're still listening and living the experiences of something that is real. Whereas when you kind of give up that attachment to the world, you escape into a book or a story that is far different than what you could imagine. And it actually, to me, it restores the wonder and the greatness that is in our world. I know that some fiction gives language or kind of a framework for facing things in real life, and I think that for the most part, those things kind of strengthen your outlook on what is real when things are so grand and crazy and you go into a wild world. And I know that in some points, and I'm going to reference an old phenomena that happened back when the movie Avatar had come out, and obviously Avatar is a massively successful fantasy and sci-fi fiction masterpiece by James Cameron. And people after that movie had came out experienced these great waves of depression. And I think it actually had a scientific, or not scientific, but a labeled name because of the after effects of knowing that this is not real, that you will never experience. And maybe one day you will, but at least in 2025, you're not going to experience, or at least 2020 at the time, you're not going to experience going to the great world of Pandora and linking yourself with a horse and riding around and flying around some floating islands in Pandora. But people experience that, and I guess you could experience that with fantasy, but I also think you can experience the other inverse, whereas you take what is going on in a fantasy world and you look at some of the things going on in our world and you go, maybe this isn't as bad as I think it is. Maybe I can appreciate the little things that are going on in the real world after having taken this wild journey through a fiction ride through fantasy and sci-fi. And as much as I personally wish that things in fantasy and sci-fi were real, like magic and spell casting and dragons and all kinds of different stuff, you also, for that time, you get to escape into that world. You get to escape into there and experience what a world like that would be like, even though we can't physically attain that. And I don't believe you can do that through nonfiction because we live in this world. But a couple last points here. I think that adventure stories also remind us of scale. So climbing mountains, sailing across galaxies from planet to planet, crossing realms from fairies and the Fae to warlocks and demons. It's kind of stretches your sense of what is possible as far as your own imagination of what could be out there. I'm not necessarily saying that I believe that there is a world of demons and monsters out there. And is there a world of fairies and princesses? There are princesses in this world, but no, I don't know that that's necessarily true. But greater things have happened in our existence and throughout time that it opens up the possibility of what ifs. And even if you can't cast a spell, is there some kind of version of that exists? And all in all, I think that the breadth and the width and the emotional depth and the imaginative depth and the scale of creativity that can open up yourself with fantasy and fiction and sci-fi and just fiction in general is far greater than what can be with nonfiction. Not to say that there are not interesting things that happen in nonfiction, that there aren't interesting people or interesting places or events that have happened in time, which I think it's very important to know about people and events and history and things like that, throughout your life. But fiction, to me, is far greater in terms of scale and depth and volume and imaginative creativity, because nonfiction tells us what was, what is, where fiction tells us what could be in a different world or a different time or a different place. Both are valuable, don't get me wrong, but fiction feeds the future, and that's, I think, the point I'm trying to say. What is fiction? I mean, fantasy's been around for many, many years. I mean, the oldest epics like the Epic of Gilgamesh back in 2100 BC, the Odyssey, Beowulf, those are all fantasies, and those are all relative pieces that people know about. I mean, Magic, God, and monsters. These are stories that humanity had first come up with as a way of understanding the unknown. I mean, we look up into the sky, and at once there was a great chariot of fire that rode across the sky. Now, do we know that to not be true now? Of course we do. But those things back in the day were a way to explain to both adults at the time, but then kids and adolescents of the way the world works. And you think about all the things in life, especially when you were a kid or when we think back in early history about what fiction influenced the way we now live today, it's pretty impressive. And, I would say as far as modern fantasy goes and modern fiction, you think of people like Tolkien, Stephen King, think of H.P. Lovecraft, but Tolkien, it helped formalize modern fantasy with things like Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings to what we know now. But fiction and fantasy has been around for thousands of years, and science fiction, in its case, has been around for probably 200 years-ish, and often considered, which I'm not quite sure I in the conventional sense, say that this is science fiction, which I guess it literally is science that is not real, which is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein back in 1818, which is obviously about creation and the consequences of the Dr. Frankenstein's creation. And obviously it's a tale about science. But later came H.G. Wells, which is The Time Machine, War of the Worlds. The Time Machine, if you haven't read it, it's a short story that's great. Not The Time Machine. Thinking of another story called The Butterfly Effect. You can read that. It's a couple pages. And War of the Worlds. Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then 20th Century comes along, and we see Asimov, Philip K. Dick, Ursula K. Le Guin brought. And then later in the 21st century, you see things that are far more philosophical and social themes and political ideas that are brought also into sci-fi, things like Dune and the like. But all in all, I don't think that fiction is necessarily better than nonfiction. I appreciate nonfiction, I appreciate fiction far more than I do appreciate nonfiction, but I just think that they also play such a different role. It's the what if to nonfiction's what was, and sometimes asking what if, it moves you forward. It gets you moving into the future, gets you thinking, and it creates kind of a concoction, a cocktail of creativity and creative energy in yourself that maybe otherwise you wouldn't know of. So, secondly on my list of things to talk about today is something normally I like to talk about space, or I like to talk about, tech news, what's going on with NASA, or what's going on with things out in space, or what's being invented or brought into the fold of the modern day technology. But one thing I want to talk about today was AI. AI has become such a prevalent thing in today's world. I mean, things like ChatGPT, like Sora's imaginative stuff. I mean, we have now Google has an AI now, and practically every platform or program or anything now that has any sort of user interface has some sort of AI integrated into it. Now, what is AI? And we're going to get to that here in a moment, but the roots of AI go back all the way to probably the 1950s in Alan Turing, who, if you don't know who Alan Turing was, he was a very influential person in breaking the Enigma code. And that's a whole different rabbit hole that I don't have time to go down into. But he publishes a writing called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, and he introduces the idea of machines that are thinking, and the Turing test. It was a benchmark that's actually still talked about today, but it was a huge foundational moment for technology, and people forget it happened before personal computers even existed. So if you want to look up more about this stuff, I recommend you go do, because it's really, really interesting, especially with now AI being so influential. But if we move forward back to 1956, the term artificial intelligence is born. It is coined actually at Dartmouth conference, at the Dartmouth conference, by John McCarthy, who led the. But then we'll fast forward to 1965, which we then see the actual term artificial intelligence being born, and it was coined at the Dartmouth conference led by John McCarthy, and they predicted that basically machines could soon simulate every aspect of human learning, which turned out, especially at the time, very optimistic and scarily accurate to what is now being taken place in today's world. A few years later, back into the mid-60s and 70s, early AI was mostly about logic. So things like playing chess, solving math problems, basically simulating reasoning, where AI was mostly found in labs. It's not a home thing, certainly not like it is now, but it was already trying to kind of mimic the human mind and decision making. And then we fast forward a little bit longer, and in the 1980s, programs were built to mimic experts in the fields of which are very impressive, like medicine and engineering, and you might say that this was AI's kind of corporate job, where they were introduced into the market, similar to how they're introduced now into basically every facet of our life. But they were practical, but not very relatable to the public. Like now you can have a conversation on your phone with AI. These were more practical than they were actual relatable entities that they are now. So you move forward almost to the mark of the century in 1997, and the first machine to beat a reigning world chess champion is crowned, and it shocked the world. It was called Deep Blue, and it beat chess champion Garry Kasparov, and people. Many started to think of it as the first actual thinking machine because you're beating a living human being in competition, whereas it first was independent tasks. Now it is going up in competition against the greatest thinking mind in the world, as some say, the human being. And closer to what's reasonable for a person my age in 2011, IBM's Watson wins Jeopardy, and I actually didn't know about this, but Watson's, for those of you that don't know what Watson was, it was kind of a natural process, a language processing that let it compete against humans in a language game, not just math and logic. So obviously the language game that I'm referring to is Jeopardy, but it was the first time that instead of just base logic and base math and base programming, it's now able to kind of breach what is almost creative and imaginative in the sense that we were talking about earlier, and learn to understand and speak in human language, which was a huge leap at its time. So now we take a look at 2020, where AI is basically an everyday thing now, in language models such as ChatGPT and other programs that have just boomed in popularity. But it's now in smartphones, in cars. People use it online in content creation, and assistance, in everyday workplaces. I mean, people are really being exposed to AI in a way that is certainly has not been the case in the past 10 to 15 years, especially not before that. But the leap really came when AI began generating art, writing, music, carrying conversations, and specifically back when I was in college, right towards the tail end of my college career, AI was really beginning to take off to where you could write papers, where you could spell check, where you could look up information on a website. And now it's almost secondary to any of that stuff. I mean, the first thing that pops up when you make a Google search is no longer the first things that come up in the search query, but it's now Google's AI thinking model that comes up with the most reasonable response to whatever you've entered into the search bar. But people often think now, obviously because it's such a hot button topic, that AI is a brand new thing. But AI, like we just talked about, has been all the way back since the 1950s, and it's been around for 70 years. It's just now that it's been integrated into everyday life. I mean, we saw some of the first AI being introduced, especially the modern technology with Siri in iPhones and Alexa in your house, Google Home or whatever kind of thinking models that go into your house. I mean, we have temperature systems that can regulate the temperature inside your home based on who comes into the house or who comes into a room. Music starts playing in a room based on who comes into the room. And obviously that's based on programming that corresponds with a person's normally what would be your phone or some sort of piece of technology. But now it's even getting a little crazier, where AI can detect who it's talking to, which is kind of insane. So AI has been around for a long time, and I personally think it's a pretty scary thing, especially for a person like myself who's a graphic designer. You see companies now that are using AI in ways that a graphic designer like myself would not be able to accomplish in a week, let alone in a 5-minute query on some website that lets you to make a label for ketchup. So it is scary for people that have professions that revolve around things that AI is now breaching into. I mean, writing, and specifically video games, movies, photography, all of these things are being threatened by AI, and not in the way that they're going to come alive and, destroy the world, which is never, I mean, we talk about sci-fi, never too far from a possibility, because we've seen some things, especially with ChatGPT and beyond, where personal human thinking is becoming, oddly enough, far more towards the uncanny valley than anything else, as these things are getting scarily intelligent as far as conversation goes. But my point is, AI isn't scary in the fact that the robots are going to take over the world and destroy us all, but it's going to limit what a person is capable of. Now, instead of a person being able to write and think and be creative for themselves and dive into a topic or write a paper or research or do problems and problem solving on their own, not only just in a professional sense, such as somebody that provides a service to make a living, but now you're just hindering yourself as your everyday performance and learning and being able to function as a intelligent human being. So that to me is where AI is more terrifying than some of the common thought of it's going to get too smart. My fear is that it's going to get to the point where we are no longer as free thinking and as pushing forward, pushing the envelope, reaching for the stars, imaginative as we are as human beings, but more reliant on AI and help from software and technological systems. So AI isn't a brand new thing, and it's definitely not something that has just been invented. It's a very old dream that has now finally caught up with our reality, and I don't necessarily think it's a great thing. Then finally, the last thing that I wanted to mention, and I wanted to bring up because I actually went over to the mall yesterday, and I got to walk around and look around at some of the places that I used to experience as a kid. I still experience now, but they're coming out with a new movie theater in our nearest mall, which has since closed. The movie theater, not the mall itself, but this new movie theater is being opened up. And I have some harsh opinions about movie theaters. I think movie theaters are great. I think they're wonderful. I think that especially for an experience of being able to feel like you're the first person to get out there and see the movie and experience it on the big screen. And now that the comfort of the commodities of comfort have brought themselves into the movie theater, the chairs that we sat on recently when we went and watched Marvel's Thunderbolts, they are nap-worthy chairs, and I know that certainly people that I know personally are quick to nod off during a movie. But movie theaters have come a long way since I've been a kid, at least, and I'm certainly since people that have been listening to this have been kids. But I enjoy movies in the conventional sense, movie theaters in the conventional sense that they are an experience that is far unlike what you can experience at your home, sitting at your computer or watching it on your phone or your TV. The experience to me rivals that of just the viewing experience than what you're receiving from the movie. So I think that as far as that goes, movie theaters are a wonderful thing to do, especially if you have some friends or a group. But I also think that it's a bit odd to bring a movie theater back when we know now that movie theaters are dwindling. I mean, streaming has become such an overwhelming commodity in the world that almost you see that some blockbuster movies that have been introduced in Netflix originals or Apple originals or Amazon originals, whatever it might be, movies that could have done extremely well at the box office when 10 years ago have now just been released directly to streaming platforms. So it concerns me that movie theater is not going to stay around long, specifically for the fact that anything that is a kind of dying industry would not be able to survive. Now, I've heard that they are going to be serving food and alcohol, which I have a very staunch opinion as far as what I think should be allowed in a movie theater, and I certainly don't think that full meals should be allowed in a movie theater, let alone wrapped candies and popcorn, because the last thing I want to hear is somebody smacking their lips on some chicken wings while I'm trying to listen to some monologue in a movie. So I can't say I'm exactly thrilled about that. I mean, drinking alcohol could be fun. I don't know how much you would drink in like an hour and a half movie and whether or not that would be necessary, but I mean, I guess it could be fun. So the experience itself, again, is way outweighs the movie, but I would say for myself specifically, I enjoy a movie for being able to pay close attention to a movie. So And the same thing with books as well. I'm a person that I need to kind of be in a specific environment to soak up information. And if there's noise or there's something nagging, I can't necessarily do that. So a movie theater where you're introducing more of the what's the word for it? More of the I have it right on the tip of my tongue, and I can't think of the word that I'm trying to do. The novelty. There we go. The novelty of that experience, I think, outweighs what would be a proper movie viewing experience. So I would say, as far as the going and enjoying yourself aspect of it goes, I could see that. But if you're going to watch a movie, number one, I don't think that being in a place where it's like a restaurant with a movie on is necessarily beneficial to somebody like me. But then again, I guess I can't judge it because I think I'm not necessarily certain that it's going to be around for long. I hope it is. I hope it's successful. I hope it stays a while, and I hope I get to experience it. But it's one of those things that you see, and especially 2025. It's like trying to keep your hands on a wound of somebody that's closer to the brink of death than anything. So, movie theaters, good and bad, I'd say. We'll stick with that. But thanks for listening. That's all I got for you for today. We'll come back maybe the next time with some other stuff. And if you're interested, I know this isn't the most in-depth or long-form version of listening that you could do, but it's a little something different, and maybe we'll see you here next time. Let me know what you think. If you have any interest in hearing some stuff, or you have anything that you want to talk about next week, I have a couple things that I want to talk about next week, including the weather. I know, boy, oh boy, how exciting! But I invite you to share your own thoughts, and if you have any opinions on fiction or nonfiction or whatever it might be, let me know. But anyway. This has been fun, and as always, just thoughts, just wonder, just Jub, right here on the Pine Room.